itself. But then it's also part of a much bigger campus, and often your accommodations come from that sort of bigger system. And so the question of who's who who's the person who's the person in the law school who can help you with accommodations if you're having difficulty accessing the broader system. And I think I'm done for now.
Yeah, I completely agree with Lily that sometimes your law school accommodations are going to look different than accommodations you've received in the past, because just the nature of law school and the nature of the work is different. And like they can't, like for example, law school is a lot of exam based. Like you're not really going to be doing like a lot of in-class assignments, whereas like there's just like basically a final exam at the end. And so like that would look a lot of different than like what I experienced in high school, where, you know, there was a lot of like in-class quizzes where I just needed, you know, different kinds of accommodations. So, but the advice that I have about getting accommodations is like apply as early as possible. You know, if you know that you're going to need certain kinds of accommodations, for example, I have a time accommodation. So, and I knew like I would need that as early as possible to prepare for taking exams, to make sure that my time accommodation was approved, so that when I'm practicing taking exams that I was practicing with like the proper amount of time. And so you want to make sure that you get into contact with whoever can either tell you who you need to talk to, or if you know who the disability services at your school is, get into contact with them as soon as possible and get them your paperwork, especially because sometimes they'll ask for like, you know, paperwork back from when you were in high school, and then you got to call your high school up that you haven't, you know, talked to in 8 years and see if they have your paperwork. So it could take some time to get through the process. So yeah, start as early as possible.
This is Marissa. So in terms of the accommodations that I sort of had while I was in law school, I have a physical disability. And so a lot of it was to assist with that. So like I had textbooks that were digitized, and because obviously I couldn't carry them, and I had extra time on my exams, dictation on my exams, all of those sorts of things were, and like preferential seating, because like getting up the stairs in my classroom, if there was a classroom like that, was like a bit of a challenge. All of those types of things were things that I received in law school. I also will agree with the sentiment about starting early, because the process can take a lot of time. And if it's something that you need, there's no guarantee that there will be something retroactive done about it. So they're not necessarily going to go back and say, well, you got this failing grade, you know, 3 weeks ago, but that was because of your disability. You have to make sure that if you're going to need something, if you're going to need an accommodation, that you have that documented. So I definitely recommend, if you think you're going to need an accommodation, that you definitely do go through that office. And I think the other thing is that you don't always know whether you're going to need an accommodation, because law school is really different. And there might be things that get exacerbated or come up, or you know, that you just never experienced before. So it's just really hard to tell. And I think that's part and parcel of what Lili was sort of saying, and what Megyn was sort of saying, is that not only will the accommodations and what you need be different, but just, you know, how your disability manifests might be different. And so it's really hard to know. But I think that's important. And I think the other thing that's important is that understanding the need to document in the event that you need, you know, to take the bar exam, or something like that. I think in some ways, people make that a little scarier than it is, but in some ways they don't. I mean, there are some jurisdictions that are super, super strict about that. There are other jurisdictions that are a little more lax, so it really depends. Like, for example, I had some accommodations on the MPRE that I didn't get. I didn't get time and a half on the MPRE, but I did get it on the bar exam anyway. I had time and a half in law school. So it just really depends upon what jurisdiction you're in. The MPRE is terrible about giving accommodations, and NCBE generally. So it just really depends. The other thing is just not taking no for an answer just right away, because you might get denied, and just accepting that you don't have to just accept that. I had accommodations denied when I first started. I had asked to be able to record classes when I had days when I could not write. And they said, no, you just need a note taker. And I said, no, that's not the accommodation that's appropriate for me personally. That doesn't help me. I need, to be able to record because I can't think or process that way. And basically, once they denied me, I wrote this like very strongly worded letter. And once I did that, they completely retreated. And then after that, they basically used my wording for everyone after that to give them the choice to either use a note taker or record. And then after that, they actually started getting rid of note takers for everyone, which was not good either in the last year. That's not good. But point being, don't necessarily just take no for an answer. Find your people. There may be people who have been there, and they can possibly help you. And that's all I have. I'm sorry, that was very long-winded.
Hi, this is Kyra. So I'll first talk a little bit about the accommodations that I had. So I had extended time on tests. I had textbooks in digital formats, and also getting in-class materials in advance. And in terms of advice, I would so much echo everything that everyone else has said. I would say that it's good to be over-inclusive in your accommodations requests. Imagine any kind of accommodation you might need under these new circumstances and put it in the request. And like Marissa said, don't just take no for an answer. I had one of my accommodations was I got a little bit of pushback on it, and I was able to present a letter from my doctor, which was actually the same one I used for the LSAT. And they ended up giving me the accommodation after all, it was something that I definitely needed. So I would certainly echo not just taking no for an answer. The other piece of advice I would have is to get a clear understanding of how your accommodations are going to be communicated to your professors, because sometimes things can get lost in translation. Like some of my professors, I guess, weren't aware that they were supposed to send me materials in advance of class. And so I thought that had been communicated through the Disability Services Office because they seemed a little reluctant to have me just communicating directly with professors. So I think just getting a clear sense of how your school operates, and if you are comfortable discussing your accommodations with professors, and if your school allows that, which I think all schools should, but not all do, I guess, then I think that that's a really good way to go, is just have an understanding of what's being communicated if you're going to need some sort of like in-class accommodation that the professor needs to be a part of.
This is Lily. If I could add just one more thing, based on experience, is make sure that you have a sense of what accommodations are possible, because there may be things that they can do that you don't know about. Like I learned in my last semester that it, that it was possible to get recordings of class as an accommodation, and I feel silly saying it, but pre COVID and no Zoom, I didn't know that that was a that 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 was even within the realm, and so as sort of what the range is that your school provides, but by but but by the same token, if you don't see something on the list, or it's not talked about, that doesn't mean that it can't happen, if you can demonstrate the need for it. So yeah.
Yeah, thank y'all for all of that. And I can echo that the only reason that I knew a lot of the accommodations that I needed to ask for was because another student, I actually think she's here, Jordan, but Jordan is also with NDLSA, and she kind of mentored me through the process. And if she hadn't been there to tell me how to request accommodations, how to, go through this system, I would have been scrambling 1L, and I already was anyway. I would have been scrambling worse than I was. So in that vein, have y'all faced any challenges with the disability service centers at your law schools? How have you learned to navigate them, and what advice do you have for incoming 1Ls? A part B to that question, if you have thoughts on it, which you are welcome to circle back, is how can we improve them to better support students, and where else can students find support systems? That's a lot. I typed it into the chat for reference.
This is Marissa. I think I already talked a little bit about, the issues that I experienced in terms of the initial denial, and then me kind of writing a letter and being like, no, you have to provide me a reasonable accommodation under the law, and this is the reasonable accommodation. But honestly, I think what sort of helped me was kind of meeting other disabled folks in school, banding together with them, even having an NDLSA is really helpful. But in terms of improving the actual systems, I mean, until we have disabled people in these systems and leading these systems, I'm just not sure how they get improved. I think that's really the problem, is people who really understand it and stop thinking about it as, minimum compliance. They're thinking about it as the ADA being the ceiling, rather than us who think about the ADA as the floor, and not the ceiling. So I think it's just sort of like changing that perspective. And I don't see that happening right now until we sort of change who's in power and who's responsible for giving out these accommodations. And it's really hard. It's really hard.
Yes. This is Lily, and I definitely agree with that. I was thinking about this question, and I feel a bit conflicted, because I don't want to specifically call out my law school, but the truth is that I had what was upon reflection, a really not acceptable experience with accommodations. I never met the person who was supposed to be my specialist. She didn't respond to emails. She didn't talk to me. I think that I could have done more by going to see her. I'm going to see her in person, but that but that posed an access barrier to me because she wasn't in the law school. She was on a different part of campus, and I think that that was because the disabled disabled student office was like severely understaffed and underfunded at the time that I was in law school. And you know, in terms of what I did about it, you know, I did my best. I would CC the dean or my professors or anyone that I thought might provoke a response. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. And the truth is that I don't feel that I got what I needed from my law school, and that's sad. That that's something that I still struggle with. But I did once I met other disabled students, you know, we did advocate for a like for a law law school specific accommodation specialist who could be in the building and know more about what law students needed, and also support us in applying for bar and MPRE accommodations and such. And so yeah, I don't mean to be negative, but I do think it's important to be real about the fact that it was a struggle for me, and more so for folks who had a less obvious disability. Um, but I would say, if you don't hear from people that you need to hear from, you might need to be prepared to be a bit aggressive to get your point across to them.
Yeah, this is Marissa. I literally created like a student bar association position just for advocacy on this, so that there would be some legitimacy to it and it wasn't just like me yelling at someone constantly.
This is Lucy. We actually did something similar at NYU. We had them put a permanent disability chair on the Student Bar Association to handle this kind of stuff.
That's actually a really good idea, because, well, what I was thinking about saying, I'm gonna say backwards now because you bring that up, because one of the biggest reasons for founding the Disabled Law Student Association on my campus was to have advocacy. And the problem is that, like, having a group of people is great to advocate, but not having somebody like advocating at student bar meetings, it feels like the things that we need fall by the wayside because the school is so focused on the issues that they bring up and whatever they care about in that moment. So I that's a really good idea. I want to remember that to bring up to them. But I think my biggest challenge with disability services was not knowing what accommodations I could ask for and not knowing what I needed. And when I asked them to tell me, you know, what do law students typically need who have like similar conditions to mine, they're like, well, why don't you just tell us what you want and explain what your needs are, and then we'll help you get them. And I'm like, but I don't really know what I'm going to need because I've never been in law school before. So when after the first year of law school, when my time and a half accommodation wasn't working, I was like, clearly there's something wrong here because I understand the material, but I'm not finishing the exams. And so I tried to get double time and they wouldn't approve it until I had to go for a psych evaluation to and get the psychologist to like prove that I needed double time for the exam. And it was really a struggle because if I had known that that's what I had to do, I could have done it so much earlier on. So then I took another set of exams without the double time because I was waiting on the psych evaluation. So I didn't get double time implemented until this spring. So that was a really big challenge for me. And I think that like something I wish is that the disability services would make you aware of this stuff and like tell you like, hey, you know, a lot of law students come to realize that law school is a lot different than undergrad and you might need a different accommodation, and that accommodation might require additional, you know, medical testing that you didn't have before, so that you could be prepared for that. But when they don't tell you that because they want you to have your own experience and to just figure out exactly what you need, it actually, you know, hinders you a little bit.
This is Marissa. I think that like really highlights the point that if they were disabled, they would tell you that. They would know what to tell you. And the problem is that they don't because they're not disabled.
This is Kyra. So I did run into a few challenges, maybe not quite as many as I had expected, but there definitely were some hurdles. I think a couple of them I've mentioned, like the pushback I received when requesting it was double time, and they said that time and a half would be more appropriate for me. So I needed to kind of go back and forth with them a little bit on that. And also the challenge I mentioned with the communication with professors not being clear, and the professors telling me, oh, they never told me that I needed to send you the PowerPoints in advance. And I always get my PowerPoint done 1 minute before class starts. So this completely changes my schedule and I needed to know this earlier. So, I mean, there are a few people responsible for that, but it's just something that could have, I think, been more clearly laid out. And I think another thing was that, like, when I have needed their assistance with certain things, like, for example, there was a video that was being shown in class. And so the professor and I talked about it, and we said probably the best way to get the information would be to send that video over to disability services so that they could put together like an audio description of the video, because there's really no dialogue or anything in the video for me to be able to get the information. But then when they came back with the description, my professor watched it first and she basically said, this wasn't what I was looking for in any way at all. It doesn't tell you the relevant information that you need to know. And so I just ended up working with the professor on it. And there was a similar thing when in class there were a bunch of kind of flow charts being shown that I really didn't understand. And so I tried sending them over to the office, and I think they just don't have like the legal background for some of this stuff. Like they're not really sure like what is supposed to be getting translated, you know? So in those instances, I found it much easier to work with the professors. But like for a lot of people, that's not really an option. Like if you have a professor that's not willing to work with you, like I could think of one or two that I've had that, like if that situation had come up, I would have, like, I'm not sure exactly what I would have done or how I would have handled it. But yeah, professors, like if you have good ones, they can be a good support system. And I totally echo finding your disabled community. If there's a disabled students association at the school, or if you can just find other students to be kind of your mentors, or even just your support system to vent when things are not going well. And that has meant so much. Like my mentors who are disabled have just basically gotten me through law school, even ones that aren't even at my school. Like if you meet them through NDLSA or through other places, like all around the country, it can be very helpful.
For folks listening in who might not be familiar, there is a Facebook group that a lot of folks find really helpful and ask questions and help brainstorm together. It's called the Law, is it school or student? Someone confirm.
I think it's school, Lucy.
Okay, thank you. The Law School Disability Advocacy Coalition.
Yeah, I think that's it.
LSDAC. Yeah, so that could be a good place to start finding this community. But also, if you are at a school that does not have a Disability Allied Law Student Association or a Disabled Law Student Association of any sort, and you're interested in starting one, if you reach out to NDLSA, we have a lot of resources to help make that happen and make it a lot less burdensome on you. So going on to our next question, have you ever felt guilty or othered for using accommodations? Have you ever received negative comments from students or administrators about your accommodations? And if yes, how did you handle it?
Yeah, it's horrible because people think that you're at an advantage oftentimes for having accommodations. And the first time I was really embarrassed was when people were texting me asking me where I was during the exam. They're like, it was like the first exam, 1L year, first semester. They're like, where are you? Did you oversleep? You missed the exam. Like they called your name and you weren't here. And I was like, well, first of all, they shouldn't have called my name because they should have known that I was in another room, and that just brought attention to the fact that I wasn't there. So that was embarrassing. But then people were saying like, oh, people who get time accommodations are really at an advantage because law school exams are about having to do things in a, specific amount of time. So it's not really fair that you get extra time to do things that people have to do in a shorter amount of time. And I just try to explain to people that it's not putting you at an advantage to have extra time. It's putting you on a level playing field because my brain already works differently than yours. Like what my brain can do within that long period of time is the same thing that your brain can do in the short period of time. I still don't finish my exams even with that time because that's just how my brain works. And so I try to explain that to people that I'm just on a level playing field as them. And some people understand and some people don't, but it really does stress me out. And sometimes I do even feel guilty about it because I start thinking in my head, well, maybe I don't actually need these accommodations. Maybe I really am at a disadvantage. And I'm looking at my unfinished exam and I'm like, I'm really not at an advantage. And I know that for real. But it's really hard when you hear that around campus, people saying that kind of stuff. It makes you feel like, oh man, like they're talking about me. Like, I'm the one they're talking about who has this, not real advantage that they think is an advantage. So yeah, it's hard sometimes, but you got to do what you got to do, and you need accommodations for a reason, then you need to use them. Like I would never not use my accommodations just because I'm in a different room and people notice that I'm gone. Like, it is what it is and I need to do what I need to do. So yeah.
This is Marissa. I mean, maybe I just like maybe I just don't really care. I just don't really have any shame of any sort, but I think part of that is just really having a lot of self I guess really just putting myself first in that. But at the same time, I will say that there have been times when I think the only time I've ever really felt othered was when things have been mismanaged by the school or whoever was, trying to deal with accommodations. I think that's really when it gets stressful or othering. And that's, for example, if, they're not getting back to me about what's happening, or they're not sure what room I'm going to be in, or, there's some weird logistical nightmare. And, I have, some weird thing happened 5 minutes before my exam that nobody else is going to have the stress of. That is pretty othering. And certainly being isolated is a little bit othering, but I need that. I think for the bar exam specifically, I had to be like on the other side of the city in some weird building, which was definitely othering. But I think that's really it in terms of feeling othering. But that's from my perspective. Everyone has, you know, their own experience, and it's certainly valid to feel that way when people, especially in law school, say things like what Megyn said her you know, colleagues at law school were saying. People do say stuff like that all the time and think that way, even though it's invalid and wrong. It can make people feel like, you know, it can make people feel guilty, and it can make people feel like they shouldn't take things that they really do need. And even though, you know, for me, I don't even think the time levels the playing field for me, because I'm still in pain and then I'm tired because I have more time. So it's like, you know, so yeah, that's just my take on it.
Yeah, I don't think that I've so much experienced like being accused of not needing things because my disability is so visible. And so in some ways I think that that's, in that particular way, something of an advantage. I will say though, and I think what Marissa just said is really true, you know, if you get more time, like, it also means that you're more exhausted. And so the whole experience of exam week, you know, there was never a time when I wasn't like bone tired, like to the point that it felt dangerous because I might fall. And that, you know,
This is Marissa. Did we lose Lili?
This is Lucy, I think so. Someone else want to jump in while we wait for her to buffer?
This is Kyra. I don't really have any more thoughts to add on this. I kind of have a similar experience to Lili of just having a pretty visible disability, so have the advantage of people not questioning it, but I have had friends with non-apparent, disabilities that have had these experiences of either having things said directly or overhearing people making snide remarks about like, oh, I wish I had extra time for this. And yeah, that just makes my blood boil and makes me even more committed to like having more, I wouldn't say really awareness, but just more presence of like a disabled community on campus and people understanding what accommodations are and that they do level the playing field.
That's so true. Also, I didn't even really think of that necessarily, but as somebody with a non-apparent disability, I think that I often also feel like when I hear people talk about this kind of stuff, like I have to like give them like a detailed medical history and tell them like everything I've been through and like why I was granted the accommodation and the fact that like, you know, I had this evaluation and this evaluation done. And I shouldn't have to do that, but I almost feel like I have to get past this feeling of like either that people don't believe that it's necessary or that like, you know, I don't want people to be judging me or even be thinking that maybe I don't actually need it. So I'm like, you know, oversharing about my existence, which I shouldn't have to do, but I always feel like I have to. It's something I'm working on not doing because I don't owe people an explanation and I know that. but it's definitely hard sometimes because you feel like you have to.
This is Marissa. I mean, I think that's a pretty common experience. I mean, for folks who might use, for example, like a placard for your car, or for like, you know, using the accessible seat on the metro, or like the subway or anything like that. I mean, those are all pretty common experiences, especially if you have a disability that is not necessarily apparent to other people. So you're not alone.
Yes, this is Lucy. On the, time and a half is actually more exhausting line of thought. I had a 15-hour exam last semester, which is ridiculous. And I was not allowed to split it over 2 days because that would have given me time to consult additional material or whatever. So I sat a 15-hour exam. I literally can't do that. So I did not take up the entire 15 hours, and most certainly did not do as well as I should have been able to, because I just physically can't handle taking a 15-hour exam. And I think very few people could be like, yeah, this is where I thrive, like long distance exam taking. Olympic sport, maybe.
Was it supposed to be closed book? Like, I'm just curious, like, why they thought you might be able, like, to have more time to consult materials.
I think it was more of a concern over like talking to, oh wait, this one was closed book, actually. This one was closed book. And then they were also concerned, I think, about me discussing it with other test takers, or then if I took it earlier than people, then I would be able to tell them about it or something like that, because, so it was absurd. Do not recommend.
Maybe they should have thought about that before making such a long closed book exam.
Right, exactly.
Am I back?
Lili has rejoined us. Welcome back.
I'm so sorry. Random internet fail. So sorry, everyone.
Such is the Zoom world. No worries. We were actually just about to go to our next question, which is partially a question from the audience combined with one that we had planned. So what can you do if professors aren't honoring your accommodations? How have you handled pushback from professors when it comes to providing accommodations in class? And I know, y'all have touched on this a little bit, but if you have other things to add, go for it.
So personally, and this may not always be possible, I think if you're not getting what you need, it sometimes might be more effective to hand the problem off to someone with more power than you, who you trust. And so try to have good relationships with people in the dean's office, in your student affairs office, because like personally, I don't think that you should have to be the one to go and like yell at your professor. And if you do, then you do your best. But I think that there's a big power imbalance there, and if nothing else, I might go with a friend, or I might write them an email so that I could think more about like how to say what I need to say.
Yeah, this is Marissa. I will say that even the dean's offices, I personally have not had this experience. Luckily, I've been very lucky, but I know other people in my school even who have. And I will say that the dean's offices are not always helpful because they don't always want to get involved. They cite things like academic freedom and all of this nonsense that has nothing to do with following the law. which is the ADA. So I think it can be really hard to navigate that. And honestly, once it gets to that point, it's really hard, because then you have to keep going over people's heads until you are able to deal with the problem, and there isn't always a good solution. It's just, I mean, I've known people who have literally had to drop out of law school because of this, and it's really frustrating, and it shouldn't have to happen. And hopefully folks have administrators who are on their side, like Lili described, but it doesn't always happen, and that is the reality in some situations, and it really sucks, and it shouldn't happen, and it's not fair, and it's not legal. So just putting that out there.
Yeah, I don't really have too much to add to that, but just about like generally putting pressure on the school to ensure that professors implement accommodations, making sure that like the professors actually abide by like the, you know, I think most schools have like a generic thing they have to put in their syllabus about disabilities, and that, you know, making sure professors actually honor that. The only issue I ever really had with a professor not necessarily honoring accommodation was we had weekly quizzes. They were online on like our school website that we use, and they were timed out after a certain time. So I explained to her, like, I have accommodations and I need extra time on these quizzes. Can you add extra time to my clock? And she told me that she wasn't allowed to talk about accommodations with me and that I needed to tell the dean to do it. And then I told the dean, and the dean was like, I don't know how to add extra time to Canvas. And then honestly, at that point, because the quizzes weren't graded, I'm not gonna lie, I was just like, whatever, screw it, I don't want to deal with this right now, because I had other things going on. Like, it was just one of those things where it was like, I would have liked my accommodation to take these, you know, quizzes realistically, but because they weren't graded, I needed to worry about other things. So, you know, that was a shortcoming on my part, but it was what it was at the time. So, but I guess what I probably would do like today, and if it was graded, and, you know, if I had thought it was a more important thing to worry about, I probably would have, you know, kept hounding the dean and going to disability services and saying, like, we need to get this professor to implement the accommodation. So yeah, but I think like it's super important if a professor is not implementing your accommodations to ensure that, you know, the deans know, that the director of accommodations knows, that your disability service knows, whoever, like, that they all know about it, and that they all can tell the professor, like, hey, you need to do this because you are entitled to your accommodation.
Yeah, this is Kyra. I really don't have much to add. This was great. The only thing I would add is sometimes pushback is a little bit subtle, like them forgetting to do something like 20 times in a row. Like, we all forget things, we're all human, but sometimes it can look a little different from what you might expect. And then it turns out, oh, they actually had a problem with doing this thing for you. But maybe if you meet with them and just remind them, then they will realize, oh, I really should do this. So yeah, I mean, don't just be like me and just be like, oh, they forgot again, it's okay, like, I guess I can live without having this. Like, no, definitely don't do that. If it starts to become a problem and it's interfering with your learning, then I think addressing it either with the professor if you're comfortable, or addressing it with disability services or a dean or even another professor that you're close with might be helpful. And also, sometimes it's helpful to have another student, like a 3L or someone that you know in a meeting with you, because they can be kind of like an advocate. And sometimes when there's two people in the meeting, people won't say something that they would, like in a one-on-one meeting. That's something I learned from one of my kind of mentor law student friends.
This is Lucy. That's exactly how I handle things as well. I always make sure that, well, in part because I have a neurocognitive disorder and my delayed memory is incredibly poor. I always make sure that I have an ally in meetings with me, with admin and with student disability services, whether it be, I mean, sometimes it's my mom, you know, like the 26-year-old woman that I am, have my mom come with me, or I have my, you know, a friend or somebody else in the Disability Allied Law Student Association come with me, to make sure that, you know, I have an advocate in the room. So now that we are approaching time, we have one question in the chat, which I will read out, and then we can discuss that and then call it a day. So the question is, I'm a rising 2L, but wanted to jump on since I'm going to be the only openly disabled teaching fellow in my school's academic support program for incoming 1Ls. I was also there this past year, so I feel you. Wondering if you have any suggestions for how to effectively advocate for one's own needs. Also, any suggestions you may have for me in supporting incoming students in getting their needs met and effectively increasing disability awareness amongst faculty and students. As much as I enjoy advocacy work, it can become exhausting when so much rides on continually advocating for increased disability awareness / decreased bias. But it's so important to me to do the best I can using the energy I do have.
Thank you so much for the question, Courtney, and I'm super glad that you're going to be there in that space. I think it's super important. One thing I would say is if you do work about disability as part of your job, make sure that you're getting credit for that work, and that it counts as part of your teaching load, or pro bono hours, or whatever mechanism exists to give credit for that, because I think often disabled students feel that doing advocacy work for others is just like part of what they need to do, and I don't disagree with that, but I think it should be like seen as labor. I think if you're a teaching fellow, that might mean that you have a good rapport with your professor, and so I might just like have a conversation with them about it, and say, you know, it's important to me to support disabled students in this class, and so can we talk about what that might look like, and what you would like me to do if I get a request, or if I find that people's needs aren't being met, so that way you can help the professor help you, if that makes sense.
This is Marissa. One thing that I'll say, as a teaching fellow, my guess is I'm gonna guess that you're gonna be making money. I hope. So that kind of complicates, not complicates, but makes your relationship with your school a little bit more complex. So now not only are you a student, but you're now also an employee, which means you also have other rights. You also have the right to be accommodated as an employee. So I think you're just looking at things a little bit differently in terms of how you're accommodated and what kinds of accommodations you might need. because those accommodations as an employee look different than the accommodations you might need in class. And the interactive process also looks a little bit differently, depending upon where you go to school, under Title I of the ADA versus, other sections of the ADA, depending upon where you go to school, and 504 or whatever, again, depends on where you go to school. That's just something to sort of look out for and to, understand as a part of, going through that. But just make sure that that doesn't get lost, and that you're looking out for what you need, and understanding that that might look different as an employee versus as a student. And that might even change between workplaces. And then in terms of, looking out for your students, I mean, the best thing, to do is to sort of, disabled folks know what they need. So continuing to just be there for them, be open, and just sort of letting them know that if they need anything, that you're there, and asking them what they need. That's really what's most important, I think. Because you can't always sort of anticipate that, and people will sort of understand what they need the best. I think that's really all you can do, is sort of just be there and be someone who listens and, do the best that you can. And you're right that it shouldn't all be on us. It's unfair and it sucks. And that's sort of where we're at right now, but don't shoulder the burden. Take some time. We need to take care of each other. Just take some time to rest when you need it. That is very important. And then in terms of, trainings and stuff, you can always put together a training for faculty. I think those are very important for sort of changing environments and, changing hearts and minds and those sorts of things, for helping people understand these sorts of things from a different frame. But, those are all the types of things that you can do, and using your power to sort of do those types of things. And we're always happy to talk to you about those types of things if you'd like. And that's it.
Yeah, people are sharing, the panelists are sharing their emails in the chat, and you are more than welcome to reach out to any of us, or just info@ndlsa.org, and we can direct you to someone who can help. But would, just like as a final note, encourage folks to hold schools accountable and don't do free labor to the extent that it's possible. It's sometimes unavoidable. You're going to do free labor as a marginalized student. But for trainings and things like that, make the school hire a diversity, equity, and inclusion professional to run a training. Don't put that on you. You should be a student. You should be focusing on your education to the extent that they allow you to, and trying to hold them accountable and make it sustainable so that it's not just all on your shoulders. So on that note, it was really wonderful to share this space with all of you tonight, and we hope that we will see you at our future events. Again, if you have any questions or input, feel free to email us at any of the emails in the chat, and this recording will also be up on our YouTube at some point in the next week or so if you would like to refer back to it. But thank you to all of our wonderful panelists and our delightful interpreter and our captioner, and have a delightful rest of your evening.
Thanks, Lucy.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye,
y'all.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night. Thank you, Lucy.
See you, Lily.